You're watching now. Just hang tight. We're trying to get this thing set up. YouTube is giving us trouble. I think we've got it set up now. So if you can hear me, please let us know in the chat. We're using different. We had an issue with Zoom today, so we're using Restream, and we still are going to hopefully be able to take your Gamecock questions and talk a little ball and talk about just the latest going on in the world of sports, with everyone still dealing, obviously, with COVID-19 and everything that has to do with that. So let's see. We're going to shoot over to Chris. Chris, I guess the latest news that we have is just that, we didn't quite know what all this was going to mean for recruiting. And at least for now, we know that recruiting on campus-wise, as far as hosting visitors and all that stuff, has been pushed back again, I believe at least until the end of July. So I don't think it was a surprise that that was the case. But what is your reaction to what that means for both the colleges and for the high school kids who, once again, have now added another month in which they can't go see schools?
Well, I think there has to be an element of saying the answer that we've been saying, that we're going to have to wait and see, right? To some degree, when all this started in March in terms of the recruiting shutdown, there were some different schools of thought. Some people thought, okay, there's going to be a big, rush for kids to commit. Some thought that, hey, a lot of kids are going to end up waiting and going and taking some visits. What we've really seen is that it's sort of gone in that first direction where more kids are committing. Pat Forty from Sports Illustrated wrote a story maybe a little about 2 weeks ago where he noted that, hey, the amount of commitments nationwide is about double from the same time last year. We got a piece today on Gamecock Central sort of breaks down some of these trends. Even some kids that were planning on waiting ended up committing. And so could we see more of that? Because now kids are going to look and say, okay, this is the third or fourth time that they've extended things. Are they going to take it into, I don't know, October, November, December? When is the next time? If you're a kid, you may be thinking, when's the next time I can go visit? What are these boards going to look like? And we have seen, Wes, some of these kids are feeling the pressure, whether it's from other prospects committing. They see that. They say, I need to go grab a spot. Some coaches are telling them, hey, we're running low on spots. And so some of them are jumping into commitments. And I think we're going to see more decommitments because of that once things do open up. But look, it's not a huge surprise, that we're still in this recruiting shutdown. You remember in March, April, something like that, we picked up some inklings on our end that, look, there may not be in-person recruiting until September. And some of the reasoning for that was related to, we have no idea what's going to happen with this virus. To some degree, we don't know how it's going to apply to football still. But also, once players are allowed back on campus, the clock is accelerated moving towards the season. And now coaches are going to really need to dive into their teams and not be focused as much on recruiting. So it still creates a lot of questions, and I think we'll have to wait and see. But maybe we just continue on the same track with recruiting being earlier and earlier in terms of commitments, but more questions being created because kids may end up, in my mind, a lot of kids are still going to go visit a lot of other places whenever this thing does open up.
I think you're right, man. And I think if you look around the country, like you said, that kids have been getting bored, kids have been getting their spots. And I think, it's really hard to blame them. I think you look around and I don't know what I would do if I was in their situation, because nobody's ever been in this situation before. So, I think you look, and if you have a list of schools you want to go see, in your mind, you're probably saying, well, I'm going to wait and take visits. Well, then you see, hey, they got a commitment in my position. Oh, they just got another commitment in my position. And then coach starts to say, hey, buddy, well, we got one spot left. It's first to commit. Then what do? You probably, if it's me, if that's a school I'm very high on, I maybe take that slot. So there's just a lot at play here, man. And I think one thing I want us to dive in on, I've seen a little bit of feedback on social media, Chris, where people have asked, why can't prospects visit if the players are now going to be allowed back on campus in June? To that, I would say these are two very distinct, very different things going on here. Players, as we talked about last week, it's going to be very controlled. The way that they're coming back, everybody's going to be tested for COVID. Everybody's going to be tested for antibodies. You're working out in pods. You're really not even, they're not even supposed to hang out with their own teammates if they're not in their smaller group. So my answer to that would be yes, it sucks for the high school players. I get it. It's not fair, but you can't at this point. They're just trying to figure out how to reintroduce the current players back to campus and make it safe and healthy and make it work out. You can't then turn around and be like, hey, we went through all these different ways of making sure it's safe for them, and now we're going to have people traveling from all over the country, hitting your campus. Now, even if you tried to separate them and said no current players are going to spend any time with recruits, well, they're in the building with support staff or assistant coaches, and then the assistant coaches and support staff are in the building with your current players. So I just think it's not fair, but you sort of see why it has to be that way right now.
Yeah, and I think there are probably two primary reasons for it, and one is exactly what you mentioned. In trying to reintroduce the team, you got to give them time to prepare, coaches and players. From a conditioning standpoint, a mental readiness standpoint, you got to give them time to prepare for the season. And so what you're seeing happening is, how can you do that in the most, it's not perfect. We talked about this plenty. No scenario is going to be perfect as it relates to this in terms of reintroducing them. But when you do it, you have to do the best you can, the most controlled way that you can. And so that's why we're seeing a lot of these protocols put into place with, this is what you're going to do when you enter the building. This is what we're asking you to do when you leave the building, et cetera. You got to have all those different things in place. And so consider Westing's outside. Say you get a kid from, up north, like DMV area. Some of these kids, and you can back this up, you'll hear of them taking a Saturday and Sunday trip during the spring or summer, and they're going to go visit not just one school, but they're going to go, hey, we went to Clemson, South Carolina on Saturday, and then on Sunday we were at Georgia and Florida, or even 2 or 3 in one day. So not only are you taking outside presence or multiple kids from multiple different homes and environments, you're taking them onto one campus interaction and then to another one and then another one. So it's not just even confining one campus in which these players are going to all be in clusters, but then it's just introducing all these different, so you're going all around. And so that's a big aspect of it, as you hit on it. And the second one is, I think, the one that I hit on earlier. Coaches across college football we knew would really push, and rightfully so, nothing wrong with it, but they were going to make a push, I think, to say, hey, if we get our players back in June or July, and it's the first time we've had them in person, and still with the reintroduction period, things are still going to be voluntary even in June. When we do get our hands on our players and we haven't seen them since spring, we've got to have that time to focus in on our players and not be worrying about hosting official visits in July or whenever it may be. And so that's why there was very much this thought process early in the spring that recruiting would end up getting pushed back into September. Who knows, maybe even later. And Wes, maybe they'll open it up in August. We don't know yet, but it's going to end up being pretty close to at least, that September mark.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see what that looks like. Once we maybe do get to that point, Chris, like how we already know there are regulations that have been put in place, as far as the players coming back, and they're very detailed. They're stringent. There's a lot at play here. Does every recruit that visits your campus have to have been tested fairly recently? Does that sort of maybe play in with some of the regulations that are put on high school football, because we hope there's a high school football season, in 2020? what, do some of those regulations maybe match up? Could you maybe even work together on some of these things where if kids are being tested on a regular basis as far as being able to play on Friday nights, maybe you can somehow work that in for visits. I think there's still way more questions than answers. Now, Chris, I do think if you're sort of looking ahead, what does it look like during the season as far as visits? Then there is an aspect here that is just simply an unknown, because from a big picture standpoint, we don't know what the virus is going to look like 3-4 months from now. So has the famous curve they all talk about, is the curve pretty much all the way, at the bottom? Is there a big relapse or rebound, a second wave, if you will? Is COVID, you read so many different things. Is COVID still a part of our daily lives? Is it something that's more just, we have to be careful, but it's not as, intense of a factor as it is right now? We just don't know how these things will play out. So I think that will clearly have a big part in the determination. But Chris, I'm thinking if things are still sort of like they are right now, where it's everybody's trying to get back to normal, but nothing can be completely normal, you're not going to have recruits just rolling in and hanging out with the current players and staying at the dorms like you see them sometimes do. An official visit, there's a player host for all these kids that is sort of designated, hey, make sure this kid has a good time on campus. I don't think we're going to see that, man. Certainly the way things are right now, if you're quarantining your players pretty much and telling them don't hang out with anybody else, there's no way you're bringing in people from 3 states away and being like, hang out with this guy for 48 hours. So if things are still the way they are now, which, man, we don't know. Nobody knows. It's an unknowable. But if they are, I think you're going to have some very just sort of, hey, these are the rules for visitors. Come in. It's completely separate from everybody else. You're going to get maybe a abbreviated visit, a smaller tour, and we're going to keep you away from everyone else in order to. And then are kids from out of state comfortable getting on a plane and flying down like they normally would? There's so many other aspects that fall in to the recruiting part of this as well.
Yeah, and I think just about everything is probably on the table, and it's going to be a hard decision. I'm with you. I think we're on the same wavelength in that solving the recruiting equation is probably even harder than solving the player equation. Now fans are tough too, because you got to figure out, okay, everything from liability to how we're going to distance the fans. Fans can come from all different places as well. You got people traveling from all over. So that's also a tough one. But because of the unique circumstances of when you got recruits visiting and how visits normally go, there's normally a lot of very close contact at a lot of different places across the campus. It's very fair to question, are they going to be able to do that? And so you're exactly right. I think the best answer and the accurate answer is we don't know. We really do not know. Right now, it's just sort of being pushed back, and they'll have to continue to study it. They'll have to see where things are at. They could come up with a model right now and say, this sounds wonderful. This is what we're going to go with. And then they have to completely scrap it in, a month or two. So those are the things they got to work through. But man, I could see all sorts of scenarios. It would be extreme. Not my opinion that it's the right or wrong thing, but it would be an extreme measure to say, look, I'm sorry, there are no more in-person visits until December or at all. I can't sit here and say they will not do that. It's hard to imagine, but maybe that's possible. Maybe say, look, it's virtual visits only, do the best you can. I could certainly see, like you said, trying to limit the contact. So what if they say, look, we've already only got 15, 20,000 fans in the stands anyway. No recruits visiting for games. Is that possible? Maybe so. And Josh Sims' question just popped up. Will we see fans at the games? Yes. The plan is to have fans at the game, but it's not going to be anywhere close to a packed stadium. So, recruits at games, will they allow that? Don't know. Like you said, Wes, are fans going to feel comfortable traveling to campuses? That's another factor. So, man, it's just, I think the best way to describe it is exactly what you said. It's completely unknowable at this point, and I think all scenarios have to be on the table.
All right, so yeah, appreciate the question, Josh, and we're using a little new technology here. This restream thing is actually pretty cool. I don't know if you can see it, Chris, but on my screen, it's actually we're on Periscope today as well. It's pulling questions from Periscope and YouTube and putting them all in one chat, so I can then turn around and sort of post it to where the viewer can see it as well. So Jordan D with a question on YouTube. Appreciate you watching, Jordan. Hopefully you hit the subscribe button there. Any updates on the injury status of Colin Hill and Nick Muse? I haven't heard much. I don't know about you, Chris. I do know that Colin Hill, there was apparently a news story back where he's from in the upstate. Did you watch it? I saw somebody posted about it. Was he moving around? Was he throwing J.J. Arcega-Whiteside? Is that right?
He was, yeah. It was about JJ, who plays with the Eagles now, and main part of the story was about JJ and what he's doing, while there's no training with NFL teams, and yeah, Colin was back there throwing to him, and he looked good. He looked pretty good back there throwing. And
big arm kid, dude. I think a lot of people sort of wondered when South Carolina brought him in, like, what's is he coming in to be a coach on the, just basically somebody who knows the offense and is just a backup and can help the other guys. But everything we've heard, the kids come in to try and win the job, and that's been his mindset. And we actually get a question coming in on that exact thing here on our YouTube. If I can get it to pull from Cartwright, says, "Will Colin Hill start this year?" Chris, we've talked about this a decent amount this offseason. I tend to think it's still Ryan Helinski's to lose. Now there is an aspect of this with them just having 5 spring practices. Does the knowledge that Colin Hill has of this offense, does that play even more of a factor, considering that they weren't able to let Helinski, Doty, the other guys go through the entire spring practice? I think that is a factor, but I do, with Helinski starting as a true freshman, they've talked the passing game concepts. Muschamp talked about this on one of, I think it was with Kornblut and those guys. He's done a couple of interviews lately. Muschamp said, "Hey, this running game is going to be drastically different this year." But he said the passing game, the concepts are very similar to what they were doing previously. So is it really a big, leap as far as change in scheme for Ryan Helinski, or is it just tweaks here and there, different terminology here and there and stuff like that? That's a question I don't think we have an answer to. But I think Hill will push, and I think if the offense goes bad, Hill may get a shot. But I think right now we're almost 3 months away. If you ask me who's kicking off the season under center, I still would lean to Ryan Helinski. Are you with me on that, or do you think it's more up in the air?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. If I were a betting man, and fortunately I'm not, I'm bad at betting, gambling, but that is what I would put my money on. And I think I've sort of changed schools of thought on that from, say, once we found out that Colin Hill was going to transfer from Colorado State to South Carolina, and a little bit of time elapsed before spring practice, and we sort of heard some of the returns and some of the thought processes. And I thought at that time that, look, this is going to be really close, and it still may be, and that Colin Hill is going to have a really good shot. Then spring got here, and the thing was Colin Hill could not participate in spring, as you said, Wes, still rehabbing that knee. And Ryan Helinski, even though they only had 5 spring practices, it was really good for him. He did get those 5 spring practices in. And our understanding is they were very happy with what he did in that limited time span. And so I think that gave him some momentum, some confidence. I think that gave the staff some confidence in him, as he just adjusted to things. I think certainly the passing game concept sort of carryover helped the fact that he did have a little high school experience under center for when they do go under center. I think those things helped him. So I fully expect – I'm completely on board with you that I think it will be Ryan to start the season, but I'm also on board with you that Colin Hill's a good option to have, an experienced option who can throw the football and has had success in this exact offense under Mike Bobo, to where if they felt like for whatever reason they needed a spark or needed a change, that they could go to him and have that good option at their disposal.
Yeah, and I appreciate the question, guys. We want to obviously thank y'all for joining us here on Periscope and YouTube. If you're on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button. I think we're closing in on 3,000, and I believe on one of them I promise I'm going to give something away, either to the 3,000th person, or once we hit 3,000, I'm just going to pick somebody random on the subscriber list and give them maybe some free subscription time to Gamecock Central, which, by the way, if you want to try out GamecockCentral.com, just head to the site right now. We actually have a free trial going where you can get now until August 1, you can read our content for free. And that's not a moving date. So basically every day that you wait to sign up, that's 1 day less you could have been reading. So, so you might as well go ahead and give it a shot and look at it for free. All right, so we can take this any number of ways. I'm going to stick with the guys coming back. Chris, I know you go to the gym such as I do, and I know you and I have been in those stages where we've worked out constantly. We've been in those stages where you sort of let yourself go for a second. You try to get back in. Speaking personally, it's very tough. There's going to be a dividing line come June 8th. And I know it's probably always tough the first time back for summer, but for some guys, I got to think June 8th is going to be a reckoning day with Paul Jackson. And across college football, I would not want to be the person who has not been able to work out during quarantine, starting back a college football strength and the big one, conditioning program.
Yeah, maybe a little bit of puking, maybe like freshman sort of workout orientation. We've all heard stories about that, type of deal. So yeah, it's going to be tough. And look, even for the guys that have been, there are guys on the team that have access to a lot of cool stuff and have been able to do a lot. Now, one point that you've made, Wes, that I really agree with is it's a lot different when you have guys that are able to give you guidance in the ways of technique, but also motivation, and even having a cluster of guys that you're working out with helps, but also coaching, that makes a big difference, and Paul Jackson is a guy that I think is really going to excel in the coaching and the motivating, aspects of being a strength and conditioning coach. That's, people that know him rave about him in that department. And so it's a lot different. And then you are going to get some guys that, for whatever reason, haven't done or have not been able to do as much as they normally would, whether it's because they don't have good access, or maybe they've been doing a lot of the milk jugs or propane tank lifts or whatever it may be. It's a different ball game. And so, yeah, that's one reason we talk about, if you're going to move towards a football season, which they definitely are, got to give these guys adequate time to prepare. And I think, they're young, they're resilient. It's going to be an uphill battle and a challenge at first. I think they will get there, but it is going to be more difficult, and they will not have had as much training as they typically do going into a season, just in terms of time.
Yeah, personally speaking, I went back to Move Fitness yesterday and did a very small – they have small class sessions right now you can sign up with. It's like me and two other people all spread out. Dude, I was hurting.
Yeah.
It was like going back to the first time I worked out, I feel like. So it's crazy how fast, even if you're trying. Now, some of these guys, MarShawn Lloyd, we've talked about this before, man. That kid is such a just driven individual, has a sort of a private trainer back at home, is a professional athlete, basically playing college sports, and his mindset. I think even as a freshman, the guys that have that ability, that they're self-starters, and they have the means, the opportunity to sort of still, work out back at home, they're going to be ahead. I think does it extend all the way to the start of the season? I don't know, but I further, with all the factors, I further just circle MarShawn Lloyd as a guy that I think is definitely starting for South Carolina game one, and everything you look at points to him being an instant impact guy.
Yeah, no shortage of people when, in the spring or at any point in the off season, from the time he enrolled in January until, heck, if we started asking people right here, right now, pull out our phones and start asking people, you'll get the wide range of just, impressive adjectives. He's a dude, he's a difference maker, super talented, awesome player, awesome kid. You'll get all those sorts of things. And so, he looked really good on tape and in person during the recruiting process, and it was no different once they got him on campus. He really, showed some things in terms of just his disposition. Like you said, he's a different kind of guy. He's really, really driven, and he's one of those guys that got on campus and is setting an example, and he's a freshman, which is impressive. And on top of that, to add to his disposition, his mentality, his attitude, he's just a super talented running back. So I'm with you. I think he makes sense as the guy that, when he stepped on campus, I think he's the most talented guy. And that typically, even for guys that takes a little bit longer, I don't think it'll take him very long, but that typically ends up sorting itself out fairly quickly in year one.
Definitely. All right, we got another question here from Cartwright. I don't believe you guys can see the whole thing on your screen, but says it seems like the general fan and analysts, I should say, are overlooking to carry on going into the season. Instead, everyone's talking about Shy. Do you see the possibility of Xavier and Dak being the emerging stars? I still think it is, and thanks for the question again, man. And if you have questions, get them in. That's what we're here for. So whatever you want to talk about, we'll frame it around that. But I tend to think Chris Shy has to be the guy who takes a step forward as the primary threat. Now, if one or two other guys, be it De'Carrion Joyner, be it Xavier Legette, can do that, then that's all the better, because at least South Carolina knows what it has in Shy. Now, can he step up and be that true number one after, I think, sort of being the third threat early in his career, being the number two threat last year, behind Brian Edwards. We heard, at least I heard, all going into last year that Shy was really ready for a big season. And I think if you're Mike Bobo, you got to look for more ways to try to get Shy the football that fits his skill set and make him a priority within the offense. Sometimes guys sort of become the number two receiver because that's just what is expected of them. They sort of slot themselves there. And he obviously was not the primary focus of the offense last year. Shy, I think, can have a big year if you're making a real, true, concerted effort to get him the football. But then it's going to be up to those other guys, the two you mentioned, a Josh Vann and Ortre Smith. It's going to be up to them to take some pressure off Shy and fall into their roles as well. I think Legette is sort of the guy you also circle that could maybe make the biggest leap from freshman to sophomore year. But De'Carrion, we still don't know what he can actually do as a wide receiver. Like he's just sort of had bad luck, I think. When you look at the injuries last year, you look at the injuries to quarterback, which forced him back to that position. He's split in time. Then spring gets cut short for everybody this past season, or this past spring, I should say. So I'm just curious to see what a full-time wide receiver with that as his focus, De'Carrion Joyner, can do on this team.
And I think the encouraging thing about Joyner is that even in very limited time, in terms of actually playing receiver and just the limited reps that we saw him on the field, he showed some flashes. He looked like a guy who had some natural ability to catch the ball, because really you can't really force that. If you don't have some level of ball skills, it's sort of hard to do. And so I think he had that. Obviously, he's a guy who understands playing in space, with his elusiveness at the quarterback position. He's a very smart kid, a heady kid. So I think he could pick all that up. He just needs reps. I mean, he hasn't done it. Xavier Legette had not been a full-time wide receiver before last year. And so you look at him, he looks great. He's capable of making great catches, but he needed to become more consistent with his hands. He still needed to learn what to do. He's a big guy who can run. So he's going into year 2. Joyner's really going into year 1 is really how it should be considered. You start out as quarterback, you move to receiver, then you split time sort of, and you're banged up in between all of that. And that's a difficult deal for anybody, especially, when you're trying to go from quarterback to receiver and fully invest into that, and then you're asked to go back. So athletically, I think he's got the tools to do it. I still think that South Carolina has, from a talent perspective, not a great wide receiver room, but a better room that has showed so far. And so I think there are numerous reasons for that. Number one, quarterback play for various reasons was not as good. You got to get your guys schematically, and like you said, Wes, with Shi Smith, schematically, find him a way to get the ball. Stay healthy. That's another one. Have Josh Vann, take a step forward. Have Xavier Legette and Joyner take a step forward. Have Ortre Smith stay healthy and return to his freshman form. If those things happen, then you got a chance to be productive there, I think.
Got another question coming in. This from Thomas. What news on Zaquandre White? Nothing new other than last week. I think it was last week. Muschamp said that essentially he's going to be a early August enrollee, just like, for example, Tavian Feaster last year, where you're getting in right before camp starts and really rolling right into camp and starting football practice with the guys. We talked about this before, Chris. That's not an ideal situation. Certainly beats the alternative of not getting him in. But for me, that did sort of change my expectations a little bit, as far as the expectations for him to just step right in and make a big impact. There's going to be what access does he have? I don't know the answer to this question. What access does he have at home to conditioning? How much is that a factor now that his teammates are going to have 2 months of workouts to really get ready? So that's a big part of this equation, Chris. The more I have heard, there's actually some legitimate excitement about Rashad Amos within the program, which if you look at all the guys, if most people talk South Carolina running backs, Lloyd has the hype right now. Then as far as the returning guys, Kevin Harris is the one that everyone already sort of knows what he did in limited time last year. Incoming class, then you add Zaquandre White to the mix. Rashad Amos is sort of the forgotten guy. I was told don't be surprised if Rashad Amos surprises everybody and actually finds the field this year. You always have some injuries. It's a fact of life at that position. So you have to have depth. You have to have a guy who can step in and play. He could be the guy, but still, you go back to when they signed Zaquandre White. This is someone they're very high on, someone they think can make an impact. I just think the question is the late enrollment, and again, it's an unanswerable question, but how easily can he sort of get incorporated back into being a college football player in that just football mindset and just being conditioned. Football conditioning, we've heard people say it, it's different than just being in good shape, I think.
Yeah, and even, Tavian Feaster, I mean, you mentioned him, and I think there's a little carryover there and what you're talking about with getting back into football shape. I mean, Feaster is a guy who had been out of high school 3 years, played at a high level at Clemson, so was obviously a great athlete, but even he had an adjustment period in getting on campus late at South Carolina. He had to get practice late. He had academic stuff to finish up, and so was he working out on his own? Yeah, but it's a little bit different. And so he had to work himself into shape, and he did that very quickly, but he had to work himself into shape when he got to South Carolina and began practice, and he was able to make a quick impact. And so White's someone that they feel like, from a skill set, athletic standpoint, can do that. He's a guy that you can, some of those sweeps that we may see in the run game, you can put him out on the edges and let him run because he's got some speed, he's got athleticism. So I think the running back room is going to be really interesting. I'm still with you that I think it's going to be Lloyd as the top guy, but behind that, there's a lot of questions, and they're going to be sort of lean on experience within the program to some degree, but I do think they have some intriguing options.
Well, and not very many teams lose essentially 4 guys if you include AJ Turner.
Yeah,
and then feel good about where they are. But I think that's where things are at if you're South Carolina. You feel pretty good about where they're at. So we'll see how that position plays out. There's going to be some intriguing battles. Let's see, Cartwright with another question. Switch to wide receivers coach help Josh Vann step up in catching the ball. I would say, Chris, not necessarily the switch in receivers coach, but I do think Josh Vann is a guy that people have given up on a little bit too quickly. We saw it with our own eyes. I think Josh himself would say he struggled to live up to probably his own expectations at times last year. But this someone, Chris, you and I both got to know him pretty well in the recruiting process. We saw him in camp. This dude had some of the more natural, sticky hands of anybody we saw in camp. When he came through South Carolina on their camp day. I still think there's a scenario where Josh lives up to that potential. Chad Simmons had him as a 4-star guy in Georgia. Highly recruited kid. South Carolina beat Georgia head-to-head for him. And by all indications, Georgia wanted the kid. It wasn't just you win by default. So I think there were expectations for Josh. He didn't quite hit them. But you remember this time last year or right before the season last year, Josh Vann was one of the guys his teammates, they were talking him up going into the year. So sometimes in college football today, we give up on kids a little bit too fast. I think this is a big year for Josh Vann. We'll put it like that. Like this is a prove-it type year, but I don't think you can completely just give up on Josh Vann yet. I think there's still a lot of talent there.
Yeah, I mean, and we've seen some comments. I've heard some of those comments as well, Wes, when we discussed Josh Vann and say, hey, he needs to break out. Say, well, last year, and that was last year. And look, if it was a deal where we didn't in high school think that he was talented or knew he had struggles with it in high school, maybe you could say, yeah, it's just not going to work. But I don't know why. I don't know if anybody's pinpointed it, but he had a sophomore slump last year. You got to remember, as a freshman, he was a summer enrollee and he was coming off surgery. So he still was able to step up and help the team a little bit even that year. But it was an adjustment period for him. And they had some guys ahead of him. Debo Samuel, Brian Edwards, for example. Last year he struggled, and maybe some of it was just confidence because I think some guys struggled, especially offensively, with confidence down the stretch last year because there were a lot of things going wrong there. So I can't pinpoint it for you, but certainly he had a slump. But what you can fall back on is this is still a talented kid. He's shown some flashes, even at South Carolina, of what he can do. You mentioned Chad earlier, having him as a 4-star. Chad Simmons, our regional analyst at Rivals. I remember a story he wrote talking to Brian Lamar, the head coach at Tucker High, just raving about how good Josh's hands were. And you can go back and look at the highlight tape and see some of the catches he made. So I can't really put my finger on the struggles, but certainly it's something that he's got to fix. Can't let it happen again this year, but I do think he has the capability to do it. Is he going to be a breakout star this year? I don't know that, but I think he can certainly help the team. And he has more talent, than what has been shown so far.